मु आज साहित्य एकाडेमी सभापति परे आमर मुख्य अतिथि तथा सांस्कृतिक विभागर प्रमुख सचिव एवं अन्यतम गोपीनाथ साहित्य अनुरागी श्रीयुक्त मधुसूदन पाणी को निमंत्रण करुच्ची। सांस्कृतिक विभाग वर्तमान आमर ये ओडिशार सुपरिचित लेखक अनुवादक और ओडिशा साहित्य एकाडेमी उपसभापति डॉक्टर संग्राम जेना को मु अनुरोध करुच्ची। ओडिशा साहित्य एकाडेमी संपादक श्रीयुक्त प्रबोध कुमार राउत को मु अनुरोध करुच्ची उपस्थित होगापी। यापर आम गोपीनाथ महंती फाउंडेशन अध्यक्ष प्रोफेसर डॉक्टर ओंकारनाथ महंती को मु अनुरोध करुच्ची ए मंच रे उपस्थित रहे। आज संध्यार विशेष आकर्षण ओ गोपीनाथ महंती वक्तृता प्रदान करने पर विश्व प्रसिद्ध सामाजिक अर्थनीतिज्ञ तथा अवहेलित गरीबों सालिस विहीन संग्रामरत चिंतानायक डॉक्टर ड्रेज को मु भुवनेश्वर समस्त गोपीनाथ साहित्य अनुरागी पक्षर हार्दिक स्वागत करुच्ची। शेष आज खाली कही रखे जे आमर परम सौभाग्य ए सभा ए मंच उपरे उपस्थित अतिथिवृंद व्यतीत आज आम मेल आज उपस्थित अछंती भारतर प्रसिद्ध कवि पद्म आम ओडिशार गर्व और गौरव पद्म विभूषण डॉक्टर सीताकांत महापात्र तांको सहित अछंती ओडिशार अन्यतम ज्ञानपीठ विजेता डॉक्टर प्रतिभा राय तांको मु समस्त तरफ अभिनंदन करुच्ची। या परे कही रखे जे आम सह 6 वर्ष तले मुख्य वक्ता रूपे यही स्थान अलंकृत करिथिबा ओडिशार विशिष्ट लेखिका अनुवादिका एवं एडिटर ट्रांसलेशन और तमिलनाडु ट्रांसलेशन प्रोग्राम रो संयोजक डॉक्टर मिनी कृष्णन को ये स्वागत करुच्ची। वर्तमान आमर कार्यक्रम आरंभ रे मु आमर पोखरीपुट डीएवी स्कूल रो 2 जन छात्री श्रीमती अस्मिद्य महापात्र एवं श्रीमती अस्मी महापात्र तांकर शिक्षक संतोष कुमार करंक अधीन रे तत्वावधान रे वेद उच्चारण करने को जाउछंती। बर्तमान यही अवसर रे मु अनुरोध करुच्ची आमर मुख्य अतिथिवृंद को दयाकरी से माने गोपीनाथ महंती फोटो पाक आसी तांकर श्रद्धांजलि जणाइबा।
वायवस्थो पायवस्थ देवो वस्सविता पार्पयतु श्रेष्ठतमाय कर्मणे आप्यायुधमग्निया देवमागमुजस्वती पयस्वती प्रजावती रणमीव अयक्ष्मामावास्तेन ईशतमाध्यशंसो रुद्रस्य हेतिः परिवो वृणत्कुं ध्रुवं अस्मि न गोपतो स्यात् ब्रहीमर्या जमानस्य पशून् पाहि आनत एतु मनः पुनः कर्तवेग्दर्शाय जीवसे जयोकच सूर्यदर्शे ॐ त्र्यम्बकं यजामहे सुगन्धिं पुष्टिवर्धनम् उर्वारुकमिव बन्धनात् मृत्युर्मुक्ष्यमामृतात् ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः।
वर्तमान वेद पाठ एवं प्रदीप प्रज्वलन पर सर्वप्रथमे मु उड़ीसा साहित्य अकाडेमी संपादक श्रीयुक्त प्रबोध कुमार राउत को अनुरोध करुच्ची से तांकर वक्तव्य उपस्थापन करने।
आपण मानकु समस्तंकु नमस्कार। साहित्य रोजी रोटी जोगाड़ करी न पारे किंतु तावारे लगी जाइथिबा पोड़ा रुटी रे जह्न देखैबार सामर्थ्य रखे। साहित्य रोजी रोटी जोगाड़ करी न पारे किंतु तावारे लगी जाइथिबा पोड़ा रुटी रे जह्न देखैबार सामर्थ्य रखे। आज ओडिशा साहित्य अकाडेमी आनुकूल्य गोपीनाथ फाउंडेशन सहभागितार 31तम गोपीनाथ महांती स्मारक वक्तृतार आयोजन करा जायछि। मु आपण मानकु समस्त को यही कार्यक्रम को स्वागत करुच्ची एवं आपण मानकर उपस्थिति पे कृतज्ञता ज्ञापन करुच्ची। आज सभार सभा मुख्य साहित्य अकाडेमी सभापति वरण्य अतिथिवृंद सभार उपस्थित विशिष्ट कवि लेखक साहित्यिक सांबादिक वैद्युतिक गणमाध्यम प्रतिनिधि एवं गोपीनाथ प्रेमी सज्जन मंडली मु समस्त को नमस्कार करुच्ची। आपण माने समस्ते जानिचंती ओडिया साहित्य को प्रथम ज्ञानपीठ पुरस्कार जे सम्मानित करिथिबा प्रख्यात औपन्यासिक गोपीनाथ महांती जने युगस्रष्टा सारस्वत साधक। गोपीनाथ प्रति ओडिया जातिर कृतज्ञता निवेदन पूर्वक तांको अम्लान स्मृति को उज्जीवित कर रखा उद्देश्य रे गोपीनाथ महांती स्मारक वक्तृता कार्यक्रम ओडिशा साहित्य अकाडेमी आयोजन करी ओडिया भाषा साहित्य और संस्कृति प्रति अंगीकारबद्धता को प्रतिपादित करुच्चे। यही प्रतितजसा सुख्यात सारस्वत साधकंकर स्मारक वक्तृता कार्यक्रम गोपीनाथ इंटरनेशनल तरफरु तांको महाप्रयाणर परवर्ष अर्थात 1992 मसीह आरंभ करा जाइथिला। परवर्ती समय रे साहित्य अकाडेमी तांका सहित जोड़ी होईछि। आज उभय अनुष्ठान मिलित उद्यम रे यह कार्यक्रम आयोजन करा जाइछि। से अम्लान आत्मांकर विषय रे स्मृतिचारण करने पूर्वर साहित्य बाबत रे तांकर किछि आलेख्य आपण मानक पाखरे रखिबाकू चाहूँगी। गरीब मूलिया की आशारे साहित्य पढ़िबो तार पेज तोराणी तो सेथिरे नाही। चा टेबुल कोठा मटर विषयवस्तु तार कौन हबो। तार संस्कृति समस्या चिंता चेतना तहिरे नाही। जो वास्तव जीवन रे से बंचुची से कथा ये साहित्य कहू नाही। ତାର ଦୁଃଖ ଦୁର୍ଦ୍ଦଶା ସମସ୍ୟା ଅଭିଯୋଗର ପୋଷକତା ଏ ସାହିତ୍ୟ କରୁନାହିଁ। ସୁତରାଂ ଏଇ ଆକାଶ, ଏଇ ପବନ, ଏଇ ମଳିମୁଣ୍ଡିଆ ଉପାସିଆ ଜାତି, ଏଇ ବେଶରେ ବଟୁଆ ଖୋସା ଗାମୁଛା ପକା ମଣିଷ ଆମ ଆଗରେ ଠିଆ ହେଲାବେଳେ ତା ଭିତରେ ଯାହା ମହତ୍, ଯାହା ଆଦର୍ଶ, ଯାହା ବୁନିୟାଦର କଥା କହେ, ତାକୁ ହିଁ ଯିଏ ସାହିତ୍ୟରେ ଗ୍ରହଣ କରିଥିଲେ, ଦରବାରୀ ସାହିତ୍ୟର ଆଳଙ୍କାରିକତାରୁ ଦୂରେଇ ସାହିତ୍ୟକୁ ସାର୍ବଜନୀନ କରିବାରେ ଯାହାଙ୍କର ଭୂମିକା ଅନସ୍ୱୀକାର୍ଯ୍ୟ, ସେ ଓଡ଼ିଆ ଜାତିର ଚିରସ୍ମରଣୀୟ, ଚିରବନ୍ଦନୀୟ ଗୋପୀନାଥ ମହାନ୍ତି, ଯିଏ ପ୍ରଥମେ ବିଶ୍ୱଦୃଷ୍ଟି ନେଇ ଆମ ସାହିତ୍ୟରେ ପ୍ରାଦେଶିକ ରୂପକୁ ସୂକ୍ଷ୍ମ କରିଦେଇଥିଲେ ଓ ସେହି ସାହିତ୍ୟକୁ ବିଶ୍ୱମୁଖୀ କରିବା ଉପରେ ଗୁରୁତ୍ୱ ଆରୋପ କରିଥିଲେ। ଆଜି ଯିଏ ଅଭିବ୍ୟକ୍ତି ଉପସ୍ଥାପନ କରିବେ ଆମ ଗହଣରେ ଅଛନ୍ତି ଡକ୍ଟର ଜାନ୍ ଡ୍ରେଜ୍। କେବଳ ତାଙ୍କ ଉଦ୍ଦେଶ୍ୟରେ ଯାହା କହିଲି ତାହା ପୁଣି ଥରେ अंग्रेजी कहूँ। Gopinath Mohanty was born on the 20th of April 1914 in the village Nagavalli, close to the town of Cuttack. After a brilliant academic career, he joined the Odisha Administrative Service and was posted at various places, traveling extensively through the rural and tribal areas of the state, using his wide study of Western and Indian literature, gifted with an extraordinary eye of keen observation, and with a deep love for man and nature. Gopinath took to writing at an early age, soon carved a niche for himself among the thinking community in Odisha. Winner of the first ever Sahitya Academy Award for his novel Amrutara Santana, the first recipient of Janapitha Award from Odisha for his epic fiction Mati Matala, the first Soviet Land Nehru Award winner for his translation of Garki's My Universities. Padma Bhushan Dr. Gopinath Mohanty has been a legend in the literary scene of Odisha and respected by men of letters across the country. Author of many immortal novels and short stories, a unique biographer, a distinguished literator, an acclaimed authority on several tribal languages, their literature and life, an accomplished musician, a rare administrator, and above all, a humanist par excellence, Gopinath has left behind his magical stamp in whichever field of human endeavor that he touched. On the 20th August 1991, Gopinath Mohanty breathed his last in San Jose, California. ओडिशा साहित्य एकाडेमी सचिव भाव में आज सभारे उपस्थित बरण्य अतिथि मानकर परिचय प्रदान करने मोर कर्तव्य। से हिसाब से आज सभार जे मुख्य अतिथि सर से होचंती श्रीजुक्त मधुसूदन पाढ़ी, अतिरिक्त मुख्य शासन सचिव, ओडिशा भाषा साहित्य और संस्कृति विभाग ओडिशा। सारे ये कहले जे सर्ट सारी दिए तो विषय खाली गोटे पद कहूँ। जीवन को जी खेल पड़ियार फुटबॉल करी किक करी पारंती, सबु समस्या को टेनिस बॉल पर निर्घात प्रहार करी पारंती, से आम विभागर प्रिय एसीएस। प्रकृत पक्षे आज आम गहन में आमर निर्देशक रंजन कुमार दास महोदय रहिबा कथा, किंतु केतक शारीरिक असुस्थता कारण से रही पारि नांती। से आमर दिगदर्शक सबुबेले आम संगे थांती। आज तांको आमे प्रकृत में मिस करुचु। आम गहन में आज जो स्मारकी वक्तृता प्रदान करेंगे डॉक्टर जान ड्रेज। प्रश्न हो पारे जान ड्रेज कहीं से विषय गोटे पद कथा कहबी। गोपीनाथ महांती तांकर जीवदशा काल में जो निष्पेषित मानक कथा को साहित्य उतारी थिले, तांकरी अर्थनैतिक अपलिफ्टमेंट पई डॉक्टर जान ड्रेज निज जीवन को बाजी लगाई। सुदूर बेल्जियम रु आसी भारत माटी रे से मानकर जीवन पई निजको समर्पित करिसेंती। गोपीनाथ साहित्यर से जड़े बड़ एडमिरर। तेणु तांका विषय जेतिकी जानिचु John Dreyes is a Belgium-born Indian economist and Soviet social activist known across the globe. He has been deeply engaged in the developmental issues in India, such as health education, livelihood, hunger, famine, gender inequality, economic development, and fundamental rights, particularly concerning the marginalized section in society and tribals. In all these cases, he draws his own experience by living among his subject people and has come out with numerous insightful articles and books, admired by the frontline thinkers, social scientists all over. His co-worker includes several renowned economists of the world, such as Amartya Sen, Nicholas Stern, Angus Deaton, to name some. A well-known work of Dreyes was the primary education study of key states in northern India, typically referred by it short name the Probe Report. He has been actively involved in many social movements, including the Right to Information campaign that led to the Right to Information Act in India, the Right to Food campaign in India, campaigns for social and economic rights, as well as in the worldwide movement for peace and disarmament. Some of his renowned books include An Uncertain Glory, India and Its Contradictions with Amartya Sen, and Sense and Solidarity, Jholawala Economics for Everyone. Among many of other writings, he has also recently co-authored a novel, Rumble in a Village, with Luke Luarth. He has taught at the London School of Economics, the Delhi School of Economics as an honorary professor, and is currently a visiting professor of Ranchi University. Currently, both Dreyes and his wife, Dr. Bella Bhatia, live and work among the Adivasis. They stand for the rights of their poor subjects and support them against the wrongs being perpetrated upon them. Professor Angus Deaton, a Nobel laureate in economics, most fittingly described Dreyes as one of the world's finest development economists who works in a space that is widely but incorrectly ignored by most. I welcome you, sir. आम गहणरे अच्छा साहित्य एकाडेमी सभापति आम परिवार मुख्य आनुष्ठानिक भाव स्वागत जणाइबार धृष्टता करूनी तांकर अध्यक्षतार आज सभा कार्य आरंभ होती समापन हम तेणु सी सबुठी अच्छा सी आमको प्रेरणा जगाऊँ तेणु स्वागत कर धृष्टता मुझे करूनी आम गहणरे अच्छा साहित्य एकाडेमी उपसभापति डॉक्टर संग्राम जेना से आज समापन वक्तव्य रखिए आपण मैंने समस्ते जानी से जड़े भल अनुवादक 60 रु ऊर्ध्व पुस्तकर रचयिता मार्ग एशिया मैगजीन एडिटर उभय इंग्राजी एवं ओडिया भाषा लेखिबार तांकर दक्षता अच्छी मु सार को स्वागत करुच्ची सार नमस्कार आम गहणरे अच्छा प्रोफेसर ओमकार महांती श्री अमृतनाथ महांती गोपीनाथ महांती दायाद मु आपण मानकु सश्रद्ध नमस्कार करुच्ची जहाँ न कहिले आज मो कथा अधा रही ताहला आज सभारे जो विदुषी जो विज्ञ प्राज्ञ माने अछंती सेमानक भितरे पद्मविभूषण डॉक्टर सीताकांत महापात्र सार पद्मभूषण डॉक्टर प्रतिभा राय मैडम पद्मश्री डॉक्टर देवी प्रसाद पट्टनायक सार डॉक्टर मिनी कृष्णन विक्रम सार एवं आउ बहु विज्ञ प्राज्ञ माने अछंती हुए तो कहा ना छाड़ीगले किसी भूल करि पारे आपण मान समस्त को स्वागत करुच्ची गणमाध्यम प्रतिनिधिवृंद प्रिंट मीडिया प्रतिनिधिवृंद एवं आपण माने गोपीनाथ प्रेमी समस्त को मुझे स्वागत करुच्ची धन्यवाद।
परवर्ती कार्यक्रमटी होची एक पुस्तक उन्मोचन ओडिशा साहित्य एकाडेमी द्वारा प्रकाशित गोपीनाथ महंती द्वारा लिखित आदित्य नायक द्वारा अनुवादित पुस्तक उत्कलमणि दि जेम ऑफ उत्कलर उन्मोचन। ବହି ଆଣିଛନ୍ତି କି ନାହିଁ? ଆଉ ଦୁଇଟା ବହି ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ ବହି ଆଣନି ନାଇଁ ସେ ଚଳିବ ଯଦି ନ ଆପଣ ହଁ ନା ନା କିଛି ନାହିଁ ଆପଣ ସେ ରିଜର୍ଭ ନା 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 ଏଇଟା ବର୍ତ୍ତମାନ ଗୋପୀନାଥ ମହାନ୍ତି ଫାଉଣ୍ଡେସନର ଅଧ୍ୟକ୍ଷ ପ୍ରଫେସର ଡକ୍ଟର ଓଙ୍କାରନାଥ ମହାନ୍ତିଙ୍କୁ ମୁଁ ଅନୁରୋଧ କରୁଛି ତାଙ୍କର ବକ୍ତବ୍ୟ ଉପସ୍ଥାପନ କରିବା ପାଇଁ।
ସମସ୍ତଙ୍କୁ ଶୁଭ ସନ୍ଧ୍ୟା ଜଣାଉଛି। ଆଜି କିମ୍ବଦନ୍ତୀ ସାହିତ୍ୟକାର ଗୋପୀନାଥ ମହାନ୍ତିଙ୍କର 108ତମ ଜୟନ୍ତୀ ଅବସରରେ ନିଜକୁ ମୁଁ ଧନ୍ୟ ମନେ କରୁଛି ଉପସ୍ଥିତ ରହି ଆପଣମାନଙ୍କ ଗହଣରେ ଏବଂ ଏଠି ଥିବା ଯେତେ ସୁଧୀବୃନ୍ଦ ଅଛନ୍ତି ସମସ୍ତଙ୍କୁ ହାର୍ଦ୍ଦିକ ସ୍ୱାଗତ କରୁଛି ଏବଂ ଅଭିନନ୍ଦନ ମଧ୍ୟ ଜଣାଉଛି ଏହି ଅବସରରେ। ଆମ ଗହଣରେ ବହୁତ ଲୋକ ଉପସ୍ଥିତ ଅଛନ୍ତି ଯେଉଁମାନଙ୍କ ପାଇଁ ଓଡ଼ିଶା ଗର୍ବିତ, ତାଙ୍କ ବିଷୟରେ କୁହାଗଲା, ମୁଁ ତେଣୁ ଆଉ କହୁନାହିଁ। ମୁଁ ଜାଣିଛି ଏଠି ଅନେକ ବୁଦ୍ଧିଜୀବୀ ଅଛନ୍ତି, କିନ୍ତୁ ସର୍ବୋପରି ଗୋପୀନାଥ ବ୍ୟକ୍ତିତ୍ୱ ଏବଂ ଗୋପୀନାଥଙ୍କର ସାହିତ୍ୟ ଅନୁରାଗୀ ବହୁତ ବ୍ୟକ୍ତି ଏଠି ଉପସ୍ଥିତ ଅଛନ୍ତି। ଆଜି ସଭାର ଅଧ୍ୟକ୍ଷ ଡକ୍ଟର ହୃଷିକେଶ ମଲ୍ଲିକ ମହୋଦୟ ଏବଂ ମୁଖ୍ୟ ଅତିଥି ଶ୍ରୀଯୁକ୍ତ ମଧୁସୂଦନ ପାଢ଼ୀ ମହୋଦୟ। ଆଜି ଆମର ଗୋପୀନାଥ ମହାନ୍ତିଙ୍କର 31ତମ ସ୍ମାରକୀ ବକ୍ତୃତା ସଭାରେ ଆମେ ସମସ୍ତେ ଏକାଠି ହେଇଛେ, ଏକ ସୌଭାଗ୍ୟର କଥା। ଯାହାଙ୍କୁ ଆମେ ଏଠି ପାଇଛେ ଡକ୍ଟର ଡ୍ରେଇସ୍, ତାଙ୍କୁ ଆମେ ପାଇଛେ ଆମର ପ୍ରକୃତରେ ଅତ୍ୟନ୍ତ ସୌଭାଗ୍ୟର କଥା। ମୁଁ ଆଗରୁ କହିଛି, ତ ଆଜି ମୋତେ କୁହାହେଇଛି ଏଠି, ଆପଣ ଯଦି ପ୍ରୋଗ୍ରାମ ଦେଖିବେ, ଗୋପୀନାଥ ମହାନ୍ତିଙ୍କୁ ଯେମିତି ମୁଁ ଜାଣେ ଅଭିବ୍ୟକ୍ତି ଉପସ୍ଥାପନରେ, ମୁଁ ଏଥିରେ ଟିକେ ବ୍ୟତିକ୍ରମ କରିବାକୁ ଯାଉଛି, କାରଣ ମୁଁ ଗୋପୀନାଥ ମହାନ୍ତିଙ୍କୁ ଯେମିତି ଜାଣେ ସେ ବିଷୟରେ ଏଠି କହିବାର ଅବସର ବିଶେଷ ନାହିଁ, ଅବକାଶ ମଧ୍ୟ ନାହିଁ। ତେଣୁ ମୁଁ ଆଗ ଆରମ୍ଭ କରିବି ଯେ ଆଜି ପ୍ରାୟ 3 ବର୍ଷ ଅପେକ୍ଷା କରିବାକୁ ପଡ଼ିଲା ଆମକୁ ପାଇବା ପାଇଁ ଡକ୍ଟର ଡ୍ରେଇଜ୍କୁ, ଏବଂ ସେଇଟା ବିଷୟରେ ମୁଁ 2 ମିନିଟ୍ ଆପଣମାନଙ୍କ ସମୟ ନେବି। ତା କାରଣ ହେଉଛି ସେଥିରେ ଆପଣ କିଛି ନୂତନତ୍ୱ ପାଇପାରନ୍ତି ତାଙ୍କ ବିଷୟରେ ତ ପଢ଼ିଲେ ଆମର ଯିଏ ସଚିବ ଆମ ସାହିତ୍ୟ ଏକାଡେମୀର। I think I should break into English now, and you would be able to understand. I have right now the fortune of calling you as Ja. A, you are much younger, and B, let me tell you, the other day, after 2 years, we attempted to get him. The most important thing, many of you would be wondering, how did I know about him? How did we discover you? How did we discover you? You have been a teacher in Delhi or Ranchi or elsewhere, and then you have been working, and as developmental economics, your name has gone far and wide. But how does Gopinath Mohanty Foundation find you? We found you essentially because I think about 3-4 years back, I read your article. He has been a prolific writer, a columnist in various newspapers, particularly The Hindu. So this was a striking not news item, an article, and the article read, "India and the Deal, Partner or Pawn." The establishments claim that the nuclear deal is symmetric and reciprocal, turns a blind eye to the overwhelming power of the US vis-a-vis India. I, being a scientist or technologist, whatever you may call, naturally I was attracted towards this article. Lo and behold, as I started the first paragraph, and I read about Gopinath Mohanty's Paraja, and then I said, what is the connection between Gopinath Mohanty's Paraja and the nuclear deal between India and the US? It is not just me. any one of you, you go through this article, you'll find it is only he who can write this article. And so I went through that and I found what kind of admiration and love he has for that book. And we are very fortunate that the English edition of that was made possible by no other than Professor Bikram Das, who is also sitting here. So Bikram Babu, mu apanku namaskar karuchi, because you introduced Gopinath Mohanty to the world for the first time. And through you, it was Jean Dreyes who was also introduced to Gopinath Mohanty. That was the first thing. Then when he goes through the Indo-US nuclear deal, and I knew two of them, Anil Kakodkar, and I knew also Dr. S. Banerjee. Both of them I knew quite well. They were the chairman of the nuclear, the Atomic Energy Commission of India. I knew both of them. And they had initiated this deal. With Manmohan Singh, they had gone and inked the deal. So I was thinking really great. And then until I read your article and I found here is a non-physicist writing about the nuclear deal and finding out the loopholes, how overwhelmingly it is sided towards the US, exactly how a Jamindar or the Kumuti and the peasant or the Adivasi, when their deal, quote-unquote deal, takes place, it is very similar. That is exactly how he brings about the similarity. That is such a beautiful simile. So, it goes on and on. I went through that. So, I had set my heart after Dr. John Dreyes, and we tried. So, I collected your address, your telephone number and so on, which was not an easy task by any means. And then finally, I contacted him in 2019 for the first time. As luck would have it, in 2020, when we intended to call him, COVID stepped in and we didn't have a meeting. And then 2021, everything was set, and almost on the last day, your train stopped from Ranchi. So, the whole thing actually almost fell through until the great Pratibha Ray, who we consider, Padma Bhushan Pratibha Ray, we consider her as a part of our family. So we asked her to rescue us. She rescued us by delivering last year's lecture online. And I knew that Jean doesn't like to speak online. So that was one of the problems. Anyway, so 2021 passed, and 2 months back, I called him. And this is how we were surprised. The moment I called, he took the line, and I said, Jean, this is your tormentor once again. Then Jean says, I thought you have given up on me, Omkar. So that is how it broke, and we see you here. I'm very glad that you are actually here. And all of you, yes, he deserves that. And I know how important it is for him to be with his subjects. Please go through the book, you'll find how different he is. His books actually, when they are released, they are not released in five-star hotels or big communities. One of the famous books, which is, as our secretary read out, and that book is titled as Sense and Solidarity, the Jholawala Economics for Everyone. And it is again striking that the book was released by a young girl, Mukherjee, and she is one of our Rhodes scholars. Incidentally, he is called a Rhodes Scholar himself. Not Rhodes Scholar, but a Rhodes Scholar. So this girl happens to be one of the band boys and girls, one of them. And that is how the book was opened. So you are here today. And the 2 other minutes that I want to take, we start. Ame arambha karthilu Gopinath Mohanty Foundation. Gopinath Mohanty Foundation अन्य फाउंडेशन मानक ठारू टिके तार अलगा बा फरक होउची जे आमे चेष्टा करिथिलु ओडिसार साहित्य बा ओडिया साहित्य एवं प्रतिवेशी साहित्य मध्यरे गोटे सेतु बांधिबाकू केवल स्मृतिचारण नुहे सेही कथाटी मु सूचय देबक जाउची जोथि पई 31 वर्ष हेलानी मझिरे गोटे वर्ष छाड़ी दियंतु 30 टी थर आमे विभिन्न प्रदेश रु डाकिचु हमर वक्ता मानकू आज मु गणुली बांग्लादेश साहित्य प्राय 6 जन मलयालम साहित्य 5 जन इत्यादि इत्यादि भारतवर्षर प्राय प्रत्येक साहित्य आसाम 2 जन तेलुगु तमिल पंजाबी हिंदी प्राय प्रत्येक साहित्य जो मैंने ना करछंती से माने एठिक आछंती केवल साहित्य नुहे इतिहास एवं राजनीति विज्ञान मध्य अन्य माने एठिक आछंती गोपीनाथ महांती वक्तृता प्रदान करिसेंती सी है गोटे कथा द्वितीय कथा है गोपीनाथ महांती को निज लेखा गुड़िक एकत्रित करने पाठक मानक जोगाई देवाई तेणु आज की 3 वर्ष तले आमे गोपीनाथ महांती .in बोली तांकर जो वेबसाइट कलु आपण मानकु मु सेइथि कहली गोपीनाथ महांती .in तांकर 53 खंडी पुस्तिका आपण से पाई परिवे तांकर 6टी वक्तृता विशेषकर अमेरिका रे विभिन्न जगह रे देइथिबा वक्तृता सान होजे स्टेट यूनिवर्सिटी रे प्रोफेसर जेम्स फ्रीमैन तांको इनवाइट करथिले आज एन एडजंक्ट प्रोफेसर ऑफ एंथ्रोपोलॉजी सेतबेले सेठी से ट्राइबल मानक ऊपर जो वक्तृता देइछंती जॉन ड्रेज को पाखु पठैथिली साकु मिसेई 6टी वक्तृता आपण माने समस्ते सेही वेबसाइट गले पढ़ी पारिबे एवं से वेबसाइट रे तांकर गोटे छोट नाती 4 वर्षर बर्तमान से हो गलानी 34 वर्षर अत्यंत प्रसिद्ध अंकोलॉजिस्ट किंतु ता संगे ओडिया साहित्य विषय से आलोचना करछंती गोपीनाथ महांती 4 वर्षर पिलाटी संगे सेटा मध्ये आपण माने सुनी परिबे एगुडी को सेइथर अछि मोरा विशेष किछि कहबार नाही जे मु खाली एति कहबी जे आपण मानकर साहाଯ୍य केवल पाखे रहीकि नुहे आपण मानकर मानसिक साहाଯ୍य जोगुरु ही आमर ए ट्रस्ट आगे चली तांकर अनेक लेखा एपर्यंत मध्य प्रकाश को आसीपार नहीं आज मुझे देखौली ए आदिवासी संपर्क अनेक लेखा बाकी अच्छी ताकू मध्य आमे सामना को आणिबु आपण मानकर गोटे आदिवासी लेखा जोटा गत वर्ष नहीं 2019 रे एठी आमे उन्मोचन करिथिलु ता ना होची कोरापुटर आदिवासी भाषा और संस्कृति तांकर 5टी बही एकाठी करी एवं से कुभिकंद भाषा तत्व यहीटा मुझे विशेषकर कहवाक चाहूँगी कारण ये विशेष बात बड़ विशिष्ट भाषाविद अच्छा प्रोफेसर पद्मश्री आमर देवी प्रसन्न पट्टनायक एवं देवी बाबू भाषा गोपीनाथ महांती जड़े भाषा विज्ञानी कहीं भाषा विज्ञानी गोटे स्क्रिप्टलेस जार लिपि विहीन भाषा कंध भाषा से कंध भाषार हजार हजार शब्द को एकाठी करी वाक्य को एकाठी करी सेथुरु से व्याकरण तैयारी कले जहाकू चॉम्स्की 1950 मसीह यहाँ 42-44 मसीहा अमेरिकार प्रसिद्ध प्रोफेसर चॉम्स्की जो गोटे नुआ जिनस तैयारी कले ता ना दिगला दि नेचुरल लैंग्वेज प्रोसेसिंग आपण जानते मुझे विशेष किसी पारदर्शिता ना मोर NLP जहाँ कह जाए कंप्यूटेशनल लिंग्विस्टिक्स गोपीनाथ महांती 1942 रे कंप्यूटर तांका पाखे नथिला किंतु से लिंग्विस्टिक्स प्रणाली को व्यवहार करी व्याकरण तैयारी कले गदवा भाषा कंध भाषा एवं सौरा भाषा ये 3टा भाषा कंध सौरा स्तोत्र संगीत कले एवं जो थे नरबली संपर्कीय मेरिया संगीत मध्य उपस्थापित होईछि एवं जहाँ आज कहे आमर प्रोफेसर जॉन ड्रेज मध्य जे तांकु कंध माने निजर गोटे पाठ बोलिक ग्रहण करथिले तांकु प्रास्का वंश अर्थात जो बंदर हाथी पाती मांकड़ नुहे से ये जो बड़ हनुमांकड़ वंशर गोपीनाथ महांती बोली से धर नहीं आज्ञा एति करी मु आज रोचे धन्यवाद।
आज सभार मुख्य अतिथि तथा सांस्कृतिक ओडिशा सांस्कृतिक विभागर प्रमुख शासन सचिव श्रीयुक्त मधुसूदन पाढ़ी को मु अनुरोध कर वक्तव्य उपस्थापन कर
जय जगन्नाथ समस्त को मोर नमस्कार। आज मुख्य आकर्षण प्रोफेसर जॉन ड्रेज आज सभार सभापति आम साहित्य एकाडेमी सभापति डॉक्टर हृषिकेश मल्लिक मंचासीन साहित्य एकाडेमी उपसभापति डॉक्टर संग्राम जेना संपादक प्रबोध एवं एक्स वाइस चांसलर ऑफ बीपीओटी डॉक्टर ओंकारनाथ महांती मोर सीनियर स्कूल सीनियर को अति निजर एवं बैंकर अमृत बाबू मंच तले थिबा समस्त नमस्य समस्त मोर आउथर नमस्कार। आज ये मोर विशेष किसी कहबार नहीं, से मुख्य अतिथि बोली अमृत बाबू मते बाध्य करके आनी एथरे मोर किसी विशेष किसी आम शुणापी आसचु। तेबे आमर ये जो 108तम जयंती गोपीनाथ महांती से अवसर रे जो स्मारकी वक्तृता होउची एटा साहित्य अकादेमी तरफ एटा तृतीय वक्तृतामाला। साहित्य अकादेमी वास्तव में 4टी वक्तृतामाला आरंभ करची। विशेषकर ओडिशार साहित्य साधक ओडिया भाषा साहित्य संस्कृति को लोकों पाखे पहुँचापी एवं से प्रथम टी है प्रोफेसर आर्तवल्लभ महांती स्मारकी वक्तृतामाला जहाँकि 1964 मसीह आरंभ होती। तापरे पंडित नीलकंठा स्मारक वक्तृतामाला जहाँकि 1995 मसीह आरंभ होती। तृतीय आसे गोपीनाथ महांती जहाँकि 1992 मसीह आरंभ होता फाउंडेशन द्वारा, किंतु एकाडेमी को 2012 मसीहा ठारू निजर भावे नहीं। एबे 2019 ठारू सची राउतराय स्मारक वक्तृतामाला मध्य आरंभ होती। यही स्मारक वक्तृता कार्यक्रम रे जो वक्तव्य होची ताकू किसी पुस्तक आकार रे मध्य प्रकाश करुची साहित्य अकादेमी। ता निश्चित भाव समस्त उपादेय। एवं गोपीनाथ महांती देखा गले सी ओडिशा एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव सर्विस रे रहीकि विशेष भाव में आदिवासी अंचल तांकर जेहेतु बहुत दिन काम कले सेठी जनजीवन सहित सी निजकू माने विलीन करदे से सहित मिसीगले। एवं जहाँ कहले ओमकार बाबू जे कंध मैंने जड़े व्यक्ति बोली मानुले एवं सी तांकर चालचलन हावभाव रीतिनीति को नहीं अंतर्दृष्टि माध्यम सी जो साहित्य सृष्टि करचंती निश्चित भाव में ओडिशा रो जो ओडिया साहित्यर एटा गोटे श्रेष्ठ उपलब्धि। एवं से जहाँ आमर प्रबोध बाबू कहते अमृत सन्तान में प्रथम थर पर जो केंद्रीय साहित्य अकादेमी पुरस्कार आरंभ है से प्रथम अवार्ड पाइथिले। एवं 1974 सबुठ बड़ भारतर सबुठ बड़ साहित्य क्षेत्र में पुरस्कार जहाँकि ज्ञानपीठ सम्मान मध्य पाइचंती। से मॉडर्न साहित्य को ओडिया साहित्य को निश्चित भाव में देश कहीं विदेश रे विश्व दरबार में पहुँची। एवं प्रोफेसर जॉन ड्रीज के विषय में आई टेल फ्यू वर्ड्स because I know him for about a decade now as an activist. I'll just talk in English about this because that he can understand. When I joined the food supply department in government of Odisha, the PDS situation was pretty bad, and many of the reports which government of India was sharing with us that our system was leaking everywhere, and we got to read many of the reports initiated by by Professor John Dreyes and his colleagues like Professor Ritika Khera and others. And his type of survey and other things used to be very precise and summary. Means in a very short time they will do a survey across the state and across several states. Sometime it is 6 states, sometime it is 9 states, and they will categorize what are the problems in each of the states. And they were so precise that they said that there were 2 schemes at that point of time. One is the BPL scheme, one was the APL scheme. They told APL scheme is 75% is leaking. It is not functioning at all. So then, of course, NFSA came, and we found that we did one survey in Balangir. We found that because at that time our ration cards were not digitized. They told that you should digitize the existing ration cards. We told that whether it is worth digitizing the existing ration cards, because there are many errors. बहुत गुड़ाक भूल थिला, माने whether inclusion error or exclusion error, Then we did a pilot, and we found that 30% ration cards do not exist, but ration is going to the dealers. Because when we map each of the ration card to the families, we found that about 10% ration card families had more than one ration card, sometimes some family having up to 6 ration cards also. So there are inclusion errors, there are exclusion errors. So in a district like Balangir, where everybody was supposed to get APL families were also supposed to get the rice at the BPL rates, this was really stunning. So we decided, government decided that we will go for ration cards. When we were doing ration cards, he came and he told that Bihar is using the SECC, socio-economic caste census, and Jharkhand is also utilizing the socio-economic caste census. We told we will do it little differently. Of course, we used those SECC, but not as the base. We used something else as the base. And I think today our experiment, and he also came, when we issued the ration card, within 2 months he came and they came. And we met in Raurkela and with Professor Ritika Khera, and they went around and they also gave a report, and things started changing after that. And Odisha PDS is today one of the top 3 performing states. I think he can tell better. I have left PDS or the food supply last 6 years back after digitizing and after the new system in which POS machines are used, and you can track every transaction that is happening, and it is mind-boggling number of transactions, 85 lakh transactions happening every month, and you can track, and there are about 10,000 dealers, and if somebody is not issuing, then the ration supplied to the dealers is also reduced, and everything is tracked. When the ration is lifted from the depots and when it is given to the So the kind of guidance, kind of support, kind of insight that Professor John Dreyes has provided in one scheme, I am telling. He is working across. In education he has worked, in health he is working, in PDS he is working, in several others he is working. As Professor Omkar Mohanty told, he wrote an article on nuclear deal, which was in 2008. And now economics professor talking about nuclear deal, which is science and technology. So the kind of canvas he paints is quite vast. It is indeed a great pleasure to have him here. I thank Gopinath Foundation for having chased him to this place. Thank you. Vande Utkal Jane. Namaskar.
Now, the star attraction of the evening, our memorial speaker, Professor John Dreyes. I invite him to kindly come and submit his talk.
Friends, let me begin by thanking Dr. Gopinath Mohanty's entire family for inviting me to say a few words today in his memory, and also for their warm welcome in Bhubaneswar, and for organizing a good old offline, face-to-face, flesh and bone lecture, and not just a virtual event. I think they took a lot of trouble. I'm very grateful, and I wonder if I can take the liberty of inviting Dr. Nivedita Mohanty to join us on the dais, not just because there's a bit of a gender issue, but also because she has been very kind to me today, and I'll be very happy if she joined us. Please. Friends, as you can perhaps feel, this is a very moving occasion for me because I am a great admirer of Dr. Gopinath Mohanty, both as a writer and as a person. His novel Paraja made a deep impression on me when I read it 30 years ago, soon after it was published in English translation. At that time, I had no inkling of the Adivasi way of life. But later on, as I traveled far and wide through Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and Odisha, I often remembered Paraja and its profound insights. As you have mentioned, I have also used some of these insights in other writings, including on the nuclear deal. As we honor Gopinath Mohanty's memory, we are remembering not only a particular person, but also the kind of person he represented. Aside from being a great writer and an inspiring thinker, Mohanty was a public-spirited civil servant. During his early years as an officer of the Odisha Administrative Service in Koraput and Raigada, he spared no effort to understand, befriend, and help the Adivasis of southern Odisha. He studied their way of life, learned their languages, shared their joys and sorrows, and joined their festivals with abandon. When they kept a distance, he sometimes played the flute to befriend them. I hear that he was a great flute player. I'm not surprised. It did not matter to him that all this created some resentment among the local netas and babus. Some of them apparently even complained in writing to Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru in the following words. I am quoting from this wonderful booklet by Dr. Sitakant Mohapatra, which I warmly recommend to anyone who wants to learn more about Dr. Gopinath Mohanty's life and thought. They wrote to the Prime Minister in the following words: "To our great calamity and disaster, Sri Gopinath Mohanty is posted here as the Special Assistant Agent at Raigada. He is always fond of hillmen." Hillmen must have meant Adivasis. "He is always fond of hillmen and behaves like a hillman himself. He very little respects other classes of people in front of them. He behaves as if only born for Adivasis." The Kond Adivasis, on the other hand, adopted Gopinath Mohanty as one of their own. They even assigned one of their totems to him and another to his wife Adramani. It is rare indeed for a civil servant to identify so closely with the underprivileged. Gopinath Mohanty retained the same values and commitments throughout his life, even as his administrative and academic postings took him away from the tribal world. "In all my stories and novels," he said, "it is the human concern that is always at the center." This human concern had a universal reach, but the Adivasis were always closest to his heart. As a civil servant, he stood up for their interests. As a thinker, he helped us to understand and value the Adivasi way of life. As a writer, he conveyed the beauties and tragedies of the tribal world better than the best surveys or studies can do. Gopinath Mohanty's message is more important than ever, as the Adivasi way of life is in danger of becoming a relic of the past. There is no better way of honoring his memory than to continue his efforts to ensure that the Adivasis of India get their due. This brings me to the subject of this lecture. I have deliberately chosen a daring title for it: The Adivasi Way of Life, Relic of the Past or Wave of the Future. Someone told me that this sounds like the topic of a college debate, but Omkar tells me that Gopinath Mohanty himself would have liked it very much. Let me clarify straight away that there is no such thing as a unique Adivasi way of life. The lifestyle of Adivasis varies, of course, between tribes and areas, even if we restrict ourselves to eastern India, as I shall do in this talk. Also, the Adivasi way of life does not remain the same over time. For one thing, it changes with changing modes of production. The way of life of a foraging band is bound to be different from that of a tribe that subsists from shifting cultivation or from settled agriculture, not to speak of working in coal mines. The Adivasi way of life also changes over time under the influence, good or bad, of the outside world, as well as through its own creativity. In this abundance of Adivasi ways of life, we can only look for some basic patterns. I am not particularly qualified to do this, but still, let me share a few thoughts and let you decide what you make of them. When I say I'm not particularly qualified, you may say that I'm particularly unqualified because I was born and brought up in a country and a society where there is no trace of the Adivasi way of life. All I can say in my defense is that sometimes the view of an outsider can help, as Gopinath Mohanty's own work illustrates. And let me also mention that though you may feel that today I'm skating on thin ice, in the printed version of this lecture there will be an abundance of footnotes and references to studies that help to substantiate what I'm trying to say. And with this disclaimer, I shall proceed. As a starting point, let me evoke the opening pages of Paraja, where my encounter with Gopinath Mohanty began 30 years ago. If you remember, if you read the book, the novel begins with a grand daydream. Sukrujani, the lead character, contemplates his surroundings from the veranda of his modest hut in Koraput. There are hills and forests as far as the eye can see. At the top of one hill, there's a small plot of farmland that became his after he cleared the forest there. Seeing that plot of land, he dreams that one day all the surrounding hills will be cleared of forest land and turned into thriving fields with the houses of his sons and grandsons in between. Now, environmentalists, of course, may not be so thrilled with this vision, but remember, it is only a dream. In reality, there is only so much forest land that Sukrujani and his sons would have been able to clear with their simple tools. Forest areas in those days were immense and population density was very low. So there was nothing odd in this daydream. And the reason I mention it is that it points to an interesting aspect of the Adivasi economy of Eastern India, or at least of the Adivasi economy as it existed there not so long ago. In this traditional economy, there is open access to land, but not to cultivable land. Land is made cultivable by the application of labor, mainly to clear the forest. Whoever clears the land and makes it cultivable becomes the owner of the land, or rather takes legitimate possession of it, which is not the same thing as ownership. The nature of these ownership or possession rights varies between different areas and communities. For instance, in the traditional land tenure system of the Mundas in Jharkhand, called the Khuntkati system, the land is held in common by the patrilineal descendants of the ancestors who cleared the land. It is cultivated by individual households, but the land is no one's individual property, and there is no question of selling or even renting it. Among the Orans of Jharkhand, on the other hand, individual possession is the norm, but even individual possession used to be subject to some restrictions, for instance, on selling of land. Cultivation is not the only way in which forest land becomes productive by application of labor. Other ways include hunting, gathering, fishing, grazing, and processing of minor forest products. The forest is also an abundant source of household items such as construction material, fuel wood, water, baskets, ropes, brooms, and herbal medicine. Other economic activities not linked to the forest, on the other hand, tend to be poorly developed in the same areas. Open access to forest land, therefore, is the defining feature of the traditional Adivasi economy of Eastern India. At the risk of simplification, we can say that this is a stage of the Adivasi economy where people have the best of both worlds. Open access to forest land ensures a modicum of social equality because everyone has access to the same resources. But household possession of cultivable land guarantees some individual independence. It is the abundance of forest land that makes this possible. In this respect, the situation of Adivasis in eastern India is fundamentally different from that of poor people in land-scarce areas such as the Gangetic Plain, where there are hardly any forests, cultivable land is entirely privatized, and common access resources such as ponds and grazing land are also scarce. Private ownership of land in these areas is an obvious source of inequality and conflict. It enables the landlords to call the shots. It puts the landless in a situation of extreme vulnerability to the extent of forcing them to endure abominable practices such as sexual exploitation and the caste system. Lack of common access resources also restricts women's employment opportunities and turns them into domestic workers or casual laborers. In India, private land ownership and the caste system have also led to an obsession with the control of women because sexual freedom is a threat to the integrity of the family land as well as to the purity of the caste. In short, the morass of class, caste, and gender inequalities in which the bulk of Indian society is entangled is connected in many ways with land scarcity and the private ownership of land. Common access to forest land was the traditional escape from this trap in Adivasi society. I am simplifying, of course, but the basic contrast is hard to miss. With this background, let me return to the subject of the lecture. If someone were to ask me for a single word that captures the Adivasi way of life, or rather the common element in Adivasi ways of life, I would say democracy. Jaipal Singh Munda himself put it very well in his first speech in the Constituent Assembly on 19th December 1946. He said, I'm quoting, "You cannot teach democracy to the tribal people. You have to learn democratic ways from them. They are the most democratic people on earth." For those who do not remember him, Jaipal Singh Munda grew up in a small village near Ranchi and then later on studied in Oxford. He was the first Adivasi to enter the Indian civil service, but he risked and lost his ICS career in 1928 when he absented himself to captain India's national hockey team in the Amsterdam Olympics, where Amsterdam won the gold medal. So it was more important for him to play hockey in Amsterdam than to protect his ICS career, although he later said that he had regretted that decision. After a few detours, Jaipal Singh returned to Jharkhand, where he led the Adivasi Mahasabha and later the Jharkhand Party, both of which had tremendous popular support. He was a member of the Constituent Assembly, where he often spoke up for the Adivasis, including Adivasi women. From 1952 until his death in 1970, Jaipal Singh was a member of the Lok Sabha. I mention all this because we tend to have a selective memory of history, with some people being elevated and others being forgotten or sidelined. Jaipal Singh Munda is one victim among many of this selective intellectual memory. Jaipal Singh's statement that Adivasis are the most democratic people on earth can be read as a reference to the remarkable self-government institutions of Adivasi communities. These institutions, like for example the Gram Sabha, are typically based on consensus building with everyone having a say. When I say everyone, I should clarify that this refers mainly to adult men or household heads, men or women. Even among men or among household heads, some may have a higher status, for instance, as a local headman or priest. But an Adivasi headman in eastern India is a very different character from the North Indian Thakur who lords it over the village by dint of brute force. The average Adivasi headman is more like a coordinator than a commander. To illustrate the point, consider this account of village councils in Santal society by George Somers. I'm quoting from his book. The village councils must give to each household head an equal voice and permit free access to the discussions of the village elders to any regular member of the village community. Even the village headman cannot be regarded as more than primus inter pares, the first among equals. His home and his holdings are not noticeably different from those of his fellow villagers. His dress and manners are those of the common man in Santal society. Although headmanship is traditionally inherited by the eldest son, he must be sanctioned by household heads who compose the village council. I had an opportunity to observe for myself how Gram Sabhas are conducted to this day in Kunti, the heartland of the Mundas, not far from Ranchi. It was a revealing experience. The Gram Sabhas are held every Thursday morning in memory of Birsa Munda, who was born on a Thursday, as his name indicates. Much as Somers describes for the Santals, every household is welcome to attend, and there is great respect for everyone's right to speak. It is really an experience to see how people have developed this culture of listening to each other and trying to build a consensus with the guidance of the headman, but not ruled by him or her, usually him. It is in these democratic Gram Sabhas, incidentally, that many Munda communities in Kunti recently decided to erect large stones on the outskirts of their village, asserting their right to self-governance under the constitution, a movement known as Patalgari. The government, unfortunately, misunderstood this movement and proceeded to repress it. Many innocent Adivasis were sent to jail on absurd charges of sedition, sometimes in thousands. Needless to say, this repression intensified the suspicion of the local Mundas towards the Indian state and their aspiration for self-governance. Having said this, when Jaipal Singh Munda told the Constituent Assembly that Adivasis are the most democratic people on earth, I am sure that he was thinking of a little more than their self-government institutions. To appreciate the full meaning of his statement, we must remember that democracy is not just a method of government, but also a way of life, or as Dr. Ambedkar called it, a mode of associated living. The basic principles of a democratic way of life, as he saw it, are well expressed in the slogan, liberty, equality, fraternity. The relation between the three was beautifully clarified by Dr. Ambedkar in his historic speech to the Constituent Assembly on 25th November 1949. He said, I'm quoting him, "What does social democracy mean? It means a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality, and fraternity as the principles of life. These principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity are not to be treated as separate items. Without equality, liberty would produce the supremacy of the few over the many. Equality without liberty would kill individual initiative. Without fraternity, liberty and equality could not become the natural order of things." That is the most important sentence, I think. Without fraternity, liberty and equality could not become a natural order of things. As it happens, these democratic principles are also dear to the Adivasi communities of Eastern India. Gopinath Mohanty himself drew our attention to this in his writings. Paraja, for instance, can be read as a tragedy of lost freedom and by implication as a tribute to the freedoms that Adivasis have traditionally enjoyed and cherished. Adivasis are freedom-loving people who do not submit easily to arbitrary authority, whether it is that of the colonial government or of the zamindar or the forest department or the sahukar or even the employer. They are very allergic to the diku, as the exploitative outsider is known in eastern India. I'm not sure about Orissa, but certainly in Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, that term is still used today. It is the love of freedom that united the Adivasis off and on over large parts of Chhatanagpur in the 19th century in their attempts to resist the takeover of their lands by Dikus from Bihar and other places with the complicity of the colonial government. It is the love of freedom again that created mass support for the Adivasi Mahasabha, the Jharkhand Party, and later the Jharkhand movement. And it is the love of freedom again that makes thousands of Adivasis resist displacement all over eastern India today, even when the government offers them a lot of money to make way for mines, dams, roads, or sanctuaries. I would go further and argue that almost by definition, Adivasis are people who manage to retain their freedom by fighting for it if need be. Those who failed to do so were quietly dispossessed, subjugated, and integrated in the caste system at the bottom of the ladder. Consider, for instance, the Bhoyans of Jharkhand or the Musahars of Bihar. The Bhoyans of Jharkhand are counted as a scheduled caste today, but around the end of the 19th century, they were widely regarded as a tribe, and even as a tribe, I'm quoting, which once held considerable power, as one scholar put it. I think in Orissa, the Bhoyans are still considered as tribes, which is itself interesting, but in Jharkhand, they have now become scheduled caste. The Bhoyans, as their name suggests, almost certainly had some control over land not so long ago. In fact, according to the Anthropological Survey of India, Bhoyan means owner of the soil. It is the process of dispossession and subjugation that has reduced them to land-starved casual laborers at the bottom of the caste hierarchy. This process of dispossession is not very difficult to understand. If you want a beautiful account of it, you please read chapter 15 of Amrutara Santan. It's all about how the moneylenders come in, the liquor brewers, the exploitative merchants, and how they manage through cheating and making people addicted to liquor and so on to take possession of their land. And Parja itself actually is a tale of dispossession. Much the same story applies to the Musahars, who considered themselves Bhoyans before their upper caste oppressors gave them their pejorative name, widely interpreted, rightly or wrongly, as rat eaters. By contrast, the Mundas and Santals defended their land tooth and nail. Remember, it is after a series of tribal uprisings against the Dikus and their colonial sponsors that laws such as the Chotanagpur Tenancy Act and the Santal Pargana Tenancy Act were passed. And in Jharkhand at least, these laws played a critical role in halting the dispossession process and enabling Adivasis to retain their identity. It is by resisting subjugation and defending their freedom that today's Adivasis have remained Adivasis. So that's about freedom and liberty. Turning to the principle of equality, the Adivasi societies of Eastern India are known for their relatively egalitarian values and practices. Now, I say relatively because, firstly, I want to avoid wishful thinking, and also because the egalitarian ethos of Adivasi societies is under stress today. Nevertheless, the earlier foundations of Adivasi egalitarianism have not entirely disappeared. One of these foundations, as explained earlier, is the fact that the traditional Adivasi economy in Eastern India is substantially based on open access resources such as forests, pastures, and rivers. Another foundation related to the first is that Adivasi society has largely escaped the tentacles of the caste system. As Jaypal Singh Munda put it in the same speech that I quoted earlier in the Constituent Assembly, he said, there is no question of caste in my society. We are all equal. Now, this of course is a simplification, but it strongly conveys that the caste system is alien to the Adivasi tradition of Eastern India. As Gail Omvet observed 40 years ago, I'm quoting, the opposite of the Brahmin is not the untouchable, but the tribal, who is external to the caste hierarchy, but not to Indian culture and society. This is a very important point I think she was making, that in Indian society, which mainly is a caste-ridden, oppressive society, there are important pockets of egalitarian culture. And the biggest one, the most important one, is the Adivasi society, which is outside that caste system, but part of Indian culture, so that we have to remember that diversity of the country. Similarly, Adivasi society is relatively free of extreme gender inequality. The anthropologist Verrier Elwin went so far as to claim that, I'm quoting, tribal women are as free today as all India's women were yesterday and will be tomorrow. Now again, this is an exaggeration. Adivasi communities have their own patriarchal practices, including some disturbing ones like witch hunting. But the fact remains that there are fewer restrictions on women's freedoms among Adivasis than in most other sections of Indian society. For instance, the division of labor is not so rigid. There is no seclusion of women. Love marriage is routine, and widow remarriage is well accepted. I'll give you a small anecdote that conveys this contrast. I have a friend in Jharkhand who has an elder sister who never got married. She didn't want to get married. She's now well into adulthood. And apparently her mother once told her, if you don't want to get married, it's all right, but at least have a boyfriend. Now, I found that an amazing statement. I mean, it's unthinkable that many Indian mothers outside Adivasi society would make that kind of statement, because not only does she accept that a woman may not want to marry, but on top of that, she approves of that woman remaining unmarried, having sexual relations outside marriage, and most importantly, she is concerned with the well-being of her daughter as a person, and not with what the family or the samaj is going to say about what is happening. So I think this is only an anecdote, of course, but as I mentioned earlier, we can cite many studies that point in the same direction, and also many statistics. One of the simplest statistics is a female-male ratio in the population. In a country with abysmal female-male ratios, especially among children, Adivasis stand out as a community where there is no trace of sex-selective abortion or of major discrimination between boys and girls. For example, the female-male ratio among Adivasi children in 2011 was a healthy 957 per thousand, compared with just 918 per thousand for the Indian population as a whole. 957 is fine. It's very close to the sex ratio at birth, the natural sex ratio at birth. So it means that there is neither sex-selective abortion nor any gender bias in mortality among children after they are born. 918 is abysmal. It must be one of the lowest, if not the lowest, in the world. All of this, of course, is changing. With the depletion of forest resources and the gradual shift to settled cultivation and wage labor, the economic basis of Adivasi egalitarianism is much weaker today than it used to be. Under the influence of their Hindu neighbors, some Adivasi communities have also adopted elements of the caste system, as Verrier Elwin noted as early as the 1930s among the Gonds of Mandala district. I was shocked myself to find that Adivasis in Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand often practice untouchability towards members of the so-called particularly vulnerable tribal groups, They used to be called primitive tribal groups, such as the Pahari Korwas. Gender relations in Adivasi societies are also changing as the widespread transition from bride price to dowry in the 20th century illustrates. All said and done, however, Adivasi societies of Eastern India remain one of the strongest bastions of egalitarian counterculture in India today. What about fraternity? Well, first of all, I would prefer to talk about solidarity than fraternity, partly because fraternity has a sexist ring, and also because fraternity is more demanding than solidarity. Fraternity is about the feelings that we have for each other. It is a kind of love, or what Dr. Ambedkar called fellow feeling. Fraternity, he said, consists in a sentiment which leads an individual to identify himself with the good of others. Solidarity, on the other hand, is more about what we do than what we feel. And acts of solidarity are possible with or without feelings of love or fraternity. You can have acts of solidarity based on love, but you can also have acts of solidarity based on ethical reasoning or habits of thought. For example, when we rush to the rescue of someone with an accident, it may not be because we have any particular love for that person. In fact, we may discover later that it's a person we don't like. We do it because we feel that it is the right thing to do in this situation. Somebody has an accident, you help them. There's another anecdote I can mention to convey the difference between solidarity and fraternity. It's a very interesting scene in the film Hazaron Khwanshe Aisi. I don't know if you have seen it. There's a very funny scene there where angry laborers in a Bihari village are incited to go to the landlord's house to kill him. So they are gathering and going to the landlord's house, shouting Murdabad and whatnot. And when the landlord sees them approaching, he has a heart attack. He gets frightened and he has a heart attack. And the moment he has a heart attack, people start saying, "Arey, pani lao, doctor bulao, isko chaya mein litne do." So suddenly they start helping the person that they wanted to kill, which seems absurd, but actually it's not. Because when the landlord has a heart attack, he becomes a different person. He becomes a victim who needs to be helped, and it's part of their social norms to help somebody in that situation. Okay, now, I have no idea whether there is more fraternity among Adivasis than among other people. Sometimes that is what it looks like. There is certainly plenty of friendship among Adivasis, and they often give the impression of being gentle and peaceful. But this can be deceptive. Some Adivasi communities, at least, have a rich history of violence and murder. It seems to me that asking whether there is more fraternity among Adivasis than others is pointless, just as it would be pointless to ask whether there is more fraternity in India than in China. However, what we can say with some confidence is that the Adivasis of Eastern India have remarkable traditions of solidarity and cooperation. So let me leave fraternity aside and say a little more about these manifestations of solidarity. More than 100 years ago, the great Russian anarchist Peter Kropotkin, another victim of selective intellectual memory, who has now been forgotten by most, but he was one of the great scientists and thinkers and activists of the late 19th century. He wrote a wonderful book called Mutual Aid. Somebody is clapping. Thank you. Somebody has read that book. I'll be very pleased. So he wrote this wonderful book called Mutual Aid, where he presented extensive evidence of mutual aid and mutual support in all human societies and even in the animal world. There's a treasure of wonderful examples in that book of mutual aid in human societies as well as in the animal world. The culture of mutual aid, however, is stronger in some societies than others. Mutual aid, for instance, tends to be much easier among people who are relatively equal. This is not difficult to understand because mutual aid is a form of reciprocity. You do something for me, I do something for you. There is little scope for mutual aid between a rich landlord and a landless laborer. You graze my cow today, I'll graze your cow tomorrow does not make much sense when all the cows are with the same person. It is when two persons have one cow or 10 cows each that it makes sense. It is not surprising, therefore, that mutual aid has tended to flourish in relatively egalitarian societies. As it happens, numerous forms of mutual aid and mutual support can be found among the Adivasis of eastern India. One very simple example is the way people build their house or replace their roof. Typically, this is done by a small group of friends, relatives, or neighbors who work together without pay. The owner of the house just has to feed them and perhaps give them a good amount of daru at the end of the day. There are many other examples of this sort. Hunting used to be a great occasion for mutual cooperation among Adivasis, less common today because there are so few animals left to hunt. Fishing is another example. Once or twice I have seen all the young women and men of an Adivasi hamlet jump into the pond, the local pond, to catch fish with their bare hands. Now this is very interesting. Catching fish with your bare hands is virtually impossible on your own. But if everybody is in the pond, then the fish can't escape. It's very easy to catch them. And of course, it's a lot of fun. And then you share the fish equally at the end of the day. This whole scene is wonderful. Mutual aid comes to the rescue again at the time of rice transplanting. This is another very interesting example. Transplanting is really hard work because it means bending your back the whole day with your feet in the water, right in the middle of the monsoon when it rains most of the time. And perhaps it is to make things easier that people, mainly women, work in teams, taking turn in each other's fields and often singing as they go along. Mutual aid turns this hard work into, quote unquote, a time of merriment and bonding, as Alpa Shah puts it in one description of this activity. Her description is actually a little rosy. She makes it sound like a kind of festival, but I think that is accurate as far as the role of mutual aid is concerned. A very common practice across eastern India for rice transplanting to happen by people helping each other in each other's fields. Mutual aid is also common for activities as diverse as clearing the forest, celebrating festivals, organizing marriages, resolving disputes, and of course, local self-government. When an elephant threatens to trample people's homes, everyone helps to chase it away. When an Adivasi is locked up by the police for no good reason, the entire village goes to the police station to demand his or her release. If there is such a thing as an Adivasi way of life, solidarity and mutual aid are surely a part of it. Indeed, the examples I have given should not be seen in isolation. Mutual aid, or Madait, as it is known in some Adivasi communities in Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, I'm not sure about Orissa, is an all-purpose method of getting things done. Madait can be deployed to build a house, to guard a field, to harvest a crop, graze the cattle, organize a celebration, or do whatever is better done through cooperation than individual action. Participating in Madait is an integral part of the pattern of conduct expected from every member of the community. So if you belong to that community, you have to take part in this institution of mutual aid, otherwise you have to fend for yourself. Now, the examples I have given so far relate mainly to everyday activities at the village level, but it is not difficult to cite cases of cooperation on a larger scale. The annual hunt of the Santals, called Lobir Sendra, used to be a grand affair bringing together many villages. It was followed by a democratic assembly described by one observer as the Santal High Court of Justice, where inter-village disputes were adjudicated. This court was also a forum where appeals against decisions of individual village headmen could be heard. Interestingly, the Mundas and the Hos, who are close cousins of the Santals, had a very similar tradition, also known as Lobir Sendra. Among the Mundas, according to Jaypal Singh, incidentally, his autobiography is called Lobir Sendra, and according to him, every 7th year, it was the women who went hunting and the men who stayed at home to do the cooking. As this example illustrates, mutual aid in Adivasi communities often extends well beyond the village level and sometimes even to the entire tribe. Cooperation between Adivasis of different tribes is also common. Very important to note. I have attended some Adivasi gatherings where thousands of people were able to pursue a common purpose without any sign of top-down policing. The Sarul celebrations in Ranchi and the annual gathering of Jan Sangharsh Morcha in Netarhat are two examples. Very wonderful experience to see thousands of people being able to spend 2 days together, cooperating in cooking food, in organizing accommodation and so on, without anyone bossing anyone else around. It's basically through mutual cooperation. We have much to learn from this culture of cooperation. Of course, there are many examples of solidarity and cooperation in other sections of society in India as well. Sadly, however, solidarity in India tends to work mainly within the caste or the family. As Dr. Ambedkar wrote in his book, The Annihilation of Caste, I'm quoting, "Caste has killed the public spirit. A Hindu's public is his caste. His responsibility is only to his caste. His loyalty is restricted only to his caste." There's a telling illustration of this point in a book called Ants Among Elephants, written by Sujata Gidla. Sharing her memories of childhood in a Dalit Christian family of Tamil Nadu, Gidla recalls how the village was flooded one day after a severe storm. Many people were helping each other and opening their homes for the flood-affected families, but only within their own caste. She says, I'm quoting, "Throughout the village, families of each caste helped others from the same caste. And because the Dalit families had no refuge, there were only three Dalit families, because they had no refuge to offer each other, they had to take refuge in the local school where they shivered and starved for 3 days with no one helping them." I cannot resist one more example of the spirit of cooperation among Adivasis. Soon after the formation of the Lok Sabha, the first Lok Sabha in 1952, Jaypal Singh Munda organized a cricket match between members of parliament of all parties. This must have been one of the first things he did when he joined the Lok Sabha in 1952. I believe he was possibly Minister of Sports also at that time, I'm not very sure. But anyway, he organized this cricket match between members of all parties, and the fascinating thing about this cricket match is not only the event itself, but also the thinking behind it. Lots of people helped in one way or another. Except for a predictable gender bias, the event was an egalitarian affair with everyone paying for their own ticket, including the Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru. I think one minister tried to get in his car without a ticket, and Jaypal Singh Munda stopped him and said, "No, you also have to get a ticket." It was a charity event, but also great fun. Jaypal Singh himself got some free beer for the occasion for everyone from a leading brewery. He concludes his vivid account of the occasion in his autobiography as follows, I'm quoting. He said, "The match, the lunch at the National Stadium, and the dinner achieved a great thing. They brought together all political parties, and a friendly atmosphere developed in both houses of parliament. I think there's a profound lesson in this event. We are so addicted to the competitive mode of social interaction that we forget how cooperation can sustain and enrich numerous activities. In fact, the best things in human life often build on cooperation more than competition. Even this event today is based on cooperation. This is a typical example of cooperation in social life. It's the kind of thing that we need much more of, and not just market competition. I say that as an economist who has been trained to think only in terms of competition and virtually never heard of cooperation when he was studying economics. Of course, there's a literature on cooperation in economics, but it is a specialized literature. It's not the kind of thing that a student would normally hear about in a mainstream economics course. By the way, competition itself depends on cooperation because the participants must observe the rules of the game. If they don't observe the rules of the game, then it's not competition anymore, it is a fight. That, incidentally, seems to be what is happening today in the Indian Parliament. The cooperative spirit that Jaypal Singh was trying to promote has vanished. The rules of the game have gone for a toss, and political competition has degenerated into a free-for-all fight. This is a good time to remember Jaypal Singh's advice that we should learn democratic ways from the Adivasis. Before concluding, I should give some sort of answer to the question I have posed in the title of this lecture. Is the Adivasi way of life a relic of the past or the wave of the future? The answer would depend on what we consider to be the Adivasi way of life. If we think of it in terms of material life and cultural artifacts, then it is unlikely to be the wave of the future. It is certainly possible to resist the economic policies that are all set to destroy the environment in eastern India and turn Adivasis into casual laborers on their own land. But even a different approach that respects the interests and rights of Adivasis is likely to lead to some major changes in their material and cultural life. Some traditions will survive, others not. Preserving them all at all costs, if such a thing were possible, would be like turning Adivasis themselves into a relic of the past. On the other hand, if we think of the Adivasi way of life in terms of values, especially democratic values, then there is no reason for it to be a relic of the past rather than the wave of the future. Right now, of course, it is difficult to feel optimistic about the future of democracy in India, whether it is as a form of government or as a mode of associated living. But the history of democracy is full of ups and downs. This is not the time to give up on it. The rich tradition of democratic living in Adivasi societies is a useful source of hope and inspiration. I would go further and argue that cultivating some elements of the Adivasi way of life in the society at large is a matter of survival. We have reached a point, perhaps for the first time in history, when there is a real danger that the human race will self-destroy relatively soon, or perhaps go back to the Middle Ages. Nuclear war, climate change, genetic engineering, pandemics, and a worldwide economic crisis are just 5 examples of possible ways in which this could happen. Averting these dangers requires a new culture of human cooperation across the world. It also requires creating the conditions that make cooperation possible. If we are to develop this culture of cooperation and solidarity, we would do well to take a leaf from the Adivasi way of life. To say that the Adivasi way of life is the wave of the future may sound like wishful thinking, but failing that, there may be no future at all. Thank you.
थैंक यू प्रोफेसर। वर्तमान आमर ये सभार सभापति उड़ीसा साहित्य एकाडेमी सभापति डॉक्टर ऋषिकेश मल्लिक को मु अनुरोध करुच्ची तांकर वक्तव्य उपस्थापन करने।
आउ 5 मिनिट 7 मिनिट भितर आमर सभा सरिब। आज मंचासीन ओडिया भाषा साहित्य एवं संस्कृति विभाग जहाँ को आपण माने अति आवेगपूर्ण भाव में शुणिले से वक्तृता देला परे एवं तांका वक्तृता शुणिला परे जॉन ड्रेजंकर आपण माने आविष्ट अछंती एवं मंचासीन अछंती 2 जन विशिष्ट विद्वान एवं विभिन्न पदपदवी रे थिबा व्यक्तित्व गोपीनाथ बाबू को 2 पुओ ओंकार बाबू एवं अमृत बाबू अछंती एकाडेमी उपसभापति एवं अछंती आमर सचिव प्रबोध बाबू एवं आपण माने जो माने मो सामने बसी से माने मोर अधिकांश नमस्य आगरे अछंती प्रोफेसर देवी प्रसन्न पट्टनायक अछंती डॉक्टर पद्म विभूषण सीताकांत महापात्र भारतवर्षर अन्यतम प्रख्यात कवि अछंती डॉक्टर प्रतिभा राय पद्मभूषण विशिष्ट औपन्यासिक भारतवर्षर एवं आपण माने समस्ते निवेदिता मैडम अछंती एठी मंचरे जहाँ कहले जहाँ डेच तार आउ मिस्टर डेच वी आर रियली फील प्रिविलेज to have here in this wonderful evening. We really proud of you to have you on this dash and be with us in this wonderful literary evening that is devoted to late Gopinath Mohanty. And your address in very lucid language is so illustrative that it needs no clarification, it is self-explaining. So we are proud of you and academy is really thankful to you, the trust is really thankful to you. आज केवल गोपीनाथ महांती कौन ता विषय 2-3 मिनट भितर मैं कही मोर वक्तव्य सांग करी। गोपीनाथ महांती की अंतत मते चिन्ह देइथिले डॉक्टर सीताकांत महापात्र। अधिकांश रविवार आम जो एमए पढ़ुलु आम रविवार गुड़ाक गोपीनाथ महांती के घरे कटुला ताकू मु विस्तार करूना जो एमए रे कौन गोपीनाथ महांती से कहवाक चाहूँगी नट सेल। गोपीनाथ महांती जो पढ़ाऊली एमए रे गोपीनाथ महांती परजा और दाना पानी मझे मझे जा गोपी बाबू घरे आम बसुलु से आम अमृत बाबू ओंकार बाबू को भल भाव जानी नथिलु। अलैच लवंग गुजराती थुआ मिसेस महांती थे मझे मझे आसुवे चा दौथे एडे एडे बड़ मोटा बही धरिकी गोपी बाबू बसी थे आंगुली देकी जब से बाथरूम गले से मोटा बहीटा को सेम धरिकी बाथरूम को जीवे एभली अद्भुत लोक मु पृथ्वी देखी ना भारतवर्ष अंत देखी ना। मुझे पचारे मत पचारे तुम पढ़ाऊच परजा अच्छा कहले देखी परजार जो प्रथम ना दाना पानी पढ़ाऊच कहले देखी दाना पानी आरंभर लिखाही ओंकार बाबू टी आगुरी कहते बलिदत्त चली घुसुरिया पल्लीर बाटे बाटे सांगरे भारुआ तार घुसुरी गुह दरकार निजपाई नुहे साहेबर बंगलापाई। पचारे गोपी बाबू कौन पढ़ाऊच तुम्हें बलिदत्त कहीं घुसुरी गुह नहीं जाऊला अन्न कौन सार कौन दे पार न गोबर खत दे पार न से लेखा अच्छी जे घुसुरी गुहटे गोलाप भल बढ़े आमे से कहली मुझे सी आज्ञा घुसुरी गोलाप गछ भल बढ़े तेणुक सी घुसुरी गुह नौला साहेब खुशी करने गोपी बाबू कहले सेटा तो लेखाही कहीं लेखाही से कहले कहले गोटे संस्कृत रे श्लोक अछि प्रतिष्ठा सुकरी विष्टा प्रतिष्ठा पाइबा पाई निजर सबु किछि भी समर्पित देबा एवं प्रतिष्ठा पछरे गोड़ेबाटा होछि घुसुरी घुह सहित समान आम आखि सब मो आखि तरटी गला हमर जे आम एपर्यंत पढ़ी आसुलु एम ए क्लास रे घुसुरी गुह गोलाप भल गोलाप गछ भल बढ़े या पछरे एड़े बड़ दर्शन अछि तापर से शेष करुचंती केमि देखंतु सबुके दे सारी बलिदत्त सरोजिनी के मध्य हरई सारी सरोजिनी साहेब सांगे बुलिया जाऊँगी शेष हूँ उपन्यास पशि आसुँच बलिदत्त पचारुँच सरोजिनी गले कुआड़े चपरास कहे माँ आज्ञा साहेब सांगे जाइए बलिदत्त पचार कौ साहेब केते साहेब तो आसती रणजीत बाबू तापर से कहते सरोजिनी पुणी भूली जाइए ओह गोपी बाबूर गोटे ओह गोटे एतिकरे से हजार कथा कही दिखते एभली वंडरफुल विस्मयकर उपन्यासिक समग्र भारतवर्ष नुहे पृथ्वी में देखी ना ओह बलिदत्त तरतर हो उठी पड़ा सीधा चलला ऑफिस बखुरी को बसी पड़ी फाइल कूड़े गोटे फाइल उठे नहीं चित्कार कला चपरासी चपरासी कला हजूर जल्दी बुलाओ स्टेन बाबू को बेस यही भल एटी से कर्ता ये कारखाना जीवन एठू पछे रहे जीवन एठू पछे रहे कहला बेले गोपी बाबू कांदी कौन मुझे जानी ना प्रत्येक पाठक जी गोपी बाबू को भल पाए गोपी बाबू को उपन्यास पाए आखि छल छल हो कौन से न करी साहेबों सबू देती स्त्री की मॉडर्न करी स्त्रीटा जाइए साहेबों पाखे प्रतिष्ठा पाई प्रमोशन पाई शेष से देखुची आसिक ए फाइल कूड़ा भितर बसवा भी ठीक तार ए फाइल कूड़ा ठीक अच्छे ऑफिस ठीक अच्छे जीवन एठू दूरे ही रहे जीवन सहित यार कि संपर्क नहीं जीवन बाहर ये गोटे जगत आउ गोटे उदाहरण देकी वक्तव्य सारी जो से परदा लिखुं गोपी बाबू परदार प्रथम सेंटेंस आरंभ हो धाड़ीटा कोरापुटर लक्ष्मीपुर जीवा रास्ता रे लक्ष्मीपुर मोटे 1.5 कोस थाई जो भयंकर धर्म द्वारा घाटी पड़े एपाखु 40 सेपाखु 50 पहाड़ ठेलाठेली धक्काधक्की हो मुहांमुही हो ठिया होई थांती से धर्म द्वारा घाटी ठू उत्तर को कोसे दूर रे पड़े गोटे छोट गाँ सरसु पदर गोटे पहाड़र ढालू रे ठीक अंटा पाखे गोपी बाबू पचारे पढ़ौच परजा कहीं एपाखु 40 सेपाखु 50 वाई नट एपाखु 50 सेपाखु 50 एपाखु 100 सेपाखु 100 असमानता कहीं एपटे 40 एपटे 50 कहीं गोपी बाबू आगे आम कौन उत्तर देवु लगे आम लेखु लेखु लिखी दिए 50-40 कहले ना सेमती लेखा जाए उपन्यास विशिष्ट उपन्यासिका बस प्रतिभा से जानते कहले एपाखु सेपाख माने गोटे असमानतार कथा कह हेव्स एंड हैव नॉट्स हेव्स मान संख्या अधिक हैव नॉट्स कम से माने शक्ति रे बेसी ये शक्ति रे कम दी जन धक्का देखी मुहांमुही अच्छा गोटे क्लास स्ट्रगल कथा कहुच्छी परजा उपन्यास एवं शेष जिते परजा उपन्यास ठिया होची सरुची सेते बेले मारी देइचंती राम विषय जमीदार को बाप पुओ 3 जन आसुँच शुक्र जानी मांडिया जानी टिकरा जानी मुंडटा को धरिकी कुड़ी भितर नालिया सूर्य पहाड़ ऊपर को हाथ उठी गोपी बाबू कौन एडे मूर्ख हाथ उठी कहीं दी हाथ कहीं उठ पारे चांकड़े कहीं उठलान गोपी बाबू को रिवोल्यूशन आरंभ किंतु अल्प आरंभ हाथे मात्र आग को आरंभ हम सकाल मात्र आरंभ एवं जितेबाला भगवत चरण लिखुंट सी आणिक मुंडटा काटिक कहते गोटे जंतु मारी बोली अनकनसस गोपी बाबू कनससली कहते आदिवासी लोकटा कहूँ आम मनीष मारिछु प्रथम मार्क्सिज्म बा साम्यवाद कथा जो कहुचे प्रथम तार जदि किए शुभ दे था सी हूँ गोपीनाथ महांती मनीष मारिछु बोली कहते से कहते आमको जो दंड दब से दंड दियो सब इन्स्पेक्टर लक्ष्मीपुर थाना सब इन्स्पेक्टर बाबू चमकी पड़ी कहते उपन्यास अच्छी कहले ओ ये कहले गोटे गोटे कौन ट्रांसलेसन करेंगे इंग्राजी इंग्राजी भाषा समर्थन गोपीनाथ महांती को अनुवाद करने केमती ट्रांसलेसन करेंगे କ'ଣ କହିକି ଆପଣ ଇଂଲିଶରେ କରିବେ? ଗୋପୀବାବୁ ଥରେ ଶାନ୍ତନୁ ଆଚାର୍ଯ୍ୟଙ୍କ ଛାତ୍ର ହେଉଥାଏ ଲେଖକ ସାମୁଖ୍ୟର ବୈଠକ, ଗୋପୀବାବୁ ଥାଆନ୍ତି, ଆମେ ସବୁ ଥାଉ ସେ ଛାତ୍ର। ଗୋପୀବାବୁ ଭାରି ନଛୁଡ଼ ବନ୍ଦା ଲୋକ, କହିଲେ ସକ୍ଡ ପୁରା ଓଡ଼ିଆ କ'ଣ କହିଲ? ଓଙ୍କାର ବାବୁ ବାପା ପଚାରିଲେ ସକ୍ଡର ଓଡ଼ିଆ କ'ଣ କହିଲ? ସମସ୍ତେ ସକ୍ଡ। କିଏ କହିଲେ ଆଘାତପ୍ରାପ୍ତ ହେଲା, କିଏ କହିଲେ ଆଘାତପ୍ରାପ୍ତ ହେଲା, ଏମିତି କହିଲେ ବିଭିନ୍ନ ପ୍ରକାର ଅର୍ଥ। ଗୋପୀବାବୁ କହିଲେ ନା, କ'ଣ ହେବ ତାହେଲେ? ଗୋପୀବାବୁ କହିଲେ ହା ପଶିଗଲା, ହା ପଶିଗଲା। ମାନେ କି ଅଦ୍ଭୁତ! ମାନେ ଓଡ଼ିଆ ଭାଷାର ଯଦି ରୁଟ୍ ଅଫ୍ ଦି ଲାଙ୍ଗୁଏଜ୍ କେହି ଜଣେ ଆମ ଭାଷାରେ ଯାଇଥାନ୍ତି ଔପନ୍ୟାସିକ, ସିଏ ହେଉଛନ୍ତି ଏକମାତ୍ର ଗୋପୀନାଥ ମହାନ୍ତି। ଏହା ସ୍ୱୀକାର କରିବାରେ ମୋର ଦ୍ୱିଧା ନାହିଁ। ଏବଂ ସେଇ ଗୋପୀନାଥ ମହାନ୍ତି ପ୍ରଥମେ ଆମକୁ ଯେତେବେଳେ ଏମ୍ ଏ ପଢ଼ୁଥିଲୁ ଛାଡ଼ିବି ଏଠି, ତାଙ୍କୁ ଦିଆହେଇଥିଲା 4ଟି କ୍ଲାସ୍, 2ଟି କ୍ଲାସ୍ ନେଲେ ଦେହ ଖରାପ ହେଲା, ଯାଇପାରିଲେନି। ଗୋଟିଏ କ୍ଲାସ୍ ସେ ନେଇଥିଲେ ରାଧାନାଥ ରାୟଙ୍କ ଉପରେ। ସେ ପ୍ରଥମେ ଆମକୁ ଚିହ୍ନେଇଲେ ରାଧାନାଥ ରାୟ କ'ଣ, ରାଧାନାଥ ରାୟ କ'ଣ କହିଲେ? ରାଧାନାଥ ରାୟ ପ୍ରଥମେ ଗୋଟେ ତରୁଣୀ ଝିଅକୁ ରାତିରେ ବାପାର ଜୈତ୍ରମଣି ନେଇକି ଗୋଟେ କାଠଯୋଡ଼ି କୂଳରେ ଗୋଟେ ଶତ୍ରୁ ଶିବିରକୁ ଆସିବାର ସ୍ପର୍ଦ୍ଧା ରାଧାନାଥ ରାୟ ଦେଲେ। ଗୋଟେ ନାରୀ ରାସ୍ତାରେ ଅର୍ଦ୍ଧରାତ୍ରିରେ ନିଜ ଘରୁ ବାହାରିକି ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ ଜାଗାକୁ ଯାଇପାରୁଛି ରାତିରେ, କିନ୍ତୁ ଫକୀରମୋହନଙ୍କର ରେବତୀରେ ପାଠ ପଢ଼ିବା କଥା ଉଠିଲା ବେଳକୁ ବଂଶ ସାରା ନିପାତ ହେଇଯାଉଛି। ତାହେଲେ ହୁ ଇଜ୍ ମୋଷ୍ଟ ମଡ଼ର୍ଣ୍ଣ? ଗୋପୀବାବୁ କହିଲେ ରାଧାନାଥ ହେଉଛନ୍ତି ମଡ଼ର୍ଣ୍ଣ। ତେଣୁ ମୁଁ କହିବି, ଉପସଂହାରରେ କହିବି, ଗୋପୀନାଥ ଇଜ୍ 100 years ahead of the modernism that was prevailed in his lifetime। 100 ବର୍ଷ ଆଗରେ ଥିଲେ ଗୋପୀବାବୁ ଆଧୁନିକତାର, ଏବଂ ସେହି ଆଧୁନିକତାର ପ୍ରବକ୍ତା ଗୋପୀନାଥ ମହାନ୍ତି। ତାଙ୍କର ଆଜି ପୂର୍ଣ୍ଣ ଜନ୍ମତିଥିରେ ଓଡ଼ିଶା ସାହିତ୍ୟ ଏକାଡେମୀ ଏବଂ ଗୋପୀନାଥ ମହାନ୍ତି ଟ୍ରଷ୍ଟ ଆନୁକୂଲ୍ୟରେ ମିଳିତ ଭାବରେ ଯେଉଁ ଆଜି ପାଳନ ହେଉଛି, ଏହାଦ୍ୱାରା ଟ୍ରଷ୍ଟ ଆମକୁ ଅନୁଗୃହୀତ କରିଛନ୍ତି, ଏକାଡେମୀ ଅନୁଗୃହୀତ ହୋଇଛି। ଏବଂ ଡକ୍ଟର ଡ୍ରେଜ୍ ଆଜି ଭବ୍ୟ ସନ୍ଧ୍ୟାରେ ଉପସ୍ଥିତ ରହି ଆମମାନଙ୍କୁ ତାଙ୍କର ଯେଉଁ ଅତି ମୂଲ୍ୟବାନ ବକ୍ତବ୍ୟ ଦେଲେ, ସେ ମୂଲ୍ୟବାନ ପାଇଁ ଏକାଡେମୀ ତାଙ୍କ ନିକଟରେ ବହୁତ ଦିନ ଧରି ଋଣୀ ରହିବ। ଜୟ ହିନ୍ଦ। ଆପଣମାନେ ଏଠି ବହୁ ସଂଖ୍ୟାରେ ଯୋଗ ଦେବ। ଧନ୍ୟବାଦ।
ଡକ୍ଟର ମଲ୍ଲିକ, ଆପଣଙ୍କର ବକ୍ତବ୍ୟରେ ଆମେ ସମସ୍ତେ ଚମତ୍କୃତ ହେଲୁ। ବହୁତ ବହୁତ ଆପଣଙ୍କୁ ଧନ୍ୟବାଦ ଦେଉଛି ସମସ୍ତଙ୍କ ତରଫରୁ। ବର୍ତ୍ତମାନ ଆଜି ସଭା କାର୍ଯ୍ୟର ଶେଷ ପର୍ବର ଆରମ୍ଭ। ଆଜି ଏହି କାର୍ଯ୍ୟରେ ମୁଁ ଓଡ଼ିଶା ସାହିତ୍ୟ ଏକାଡେମୀର ଭାଇସ୍ ପ୍ରେସିଡେଣ୍ଟ ଡକ୍ଟର ସଂଗ୍ରାମ ଜେନାଙ୍କୁ ଆହ୍ୱାନ କରୁଛି ତାଙ୍କର ବକ୍ତବ୍ୟ ଉପସ୍ଥାପନ କରିବା।
ସମସ୍ତଙ୍କୁ ପ୍ରଥମେ ନମସ୍କାର କରୁଛି। ସଭାପତି ମହୋଦୟ, ଆମର ମୁଖ୍ୟ ଅତିଥି ଶ୍ରୀଯୁକ୍ତ ମଧୁସୂଦନ ପାଢ଼ୀ ମହୋଦୟ, ଆମର ସେକ୍ରେଟାରୀ ପ୍ରବୋଧ ବାବୁ, ଅମୃତ ବାବୁ ଅଛନ୍ତି ଏଠି ଆମର, ଆଉ ମ୍ୟାଡ଼ାମ୍ ନିବେଦିତା ମହାନ୍ତି ଅଛନ୍ତି। ଆଗରେ ତ ବହୁ ବିଶିଷ୍ଟ ଲେଖିକା ଏବଂ ଲେଖକ ବସିଛନ୍ତି। ସମସ୍ତଙ୍କୁ ମୁଁ ପୁଣି ଥରେ ନମସ୍କାର କରୁଛି। ଗୋପୀନାଥ ମହାନ୍ତିଙ୍କର ପାଇଁ ଯେଉଁ ଆମର ଆୟୋଜନ ହେଇଛି, ଗୋପୀନାଥ ମହାନ୍ତିଙ୍କ ଜୀବନ କଥା ସବୁ କହିଗଲେ ସଭାପତି ମହୋଦୟ, ସେ ତ ସବୁ ଠିକ୍ ଥିଲା, କିନ୍ତୁ ଆମର ମୂଳ ଉଦ୍ଦେଶ୍ୟ ହେଉଛି ଯେ ଗୋପୀନାଥ ମହାନ୍ତିଙ୍କ ଏହି ଜନ୍ମଦିନରେ ଆଦିବାସୀ ସମସ୍ୟା, ଆଦିବାସୀ ସଂସ୍କୃତି ଏବଂ ଆଦିବାସୀମାନଙ୍କର କଥା ଆମେ ଜାଣିବା ଏବଂ ତାଙ୍କର କ'ଣ ସମସ୍ୟା ରହିଛି ବର୍ତ୍ତମାନ ସମୟରେ। ଡ୍ରେଜ୍ ଯେଉଁ କଥା କହିଗଲେ, ଆପଣମାନେ ସବୁ ଶୁଣିଲେ, କେମିତି ଗୋଟେ ଏଗାଲିଟେରିଆନ୍ ସୋସାଇଟି ସେଇଟା, ସେଠି ଜେଣ୍ଡର ଡିସ୍କ୍ରିମିନେସନ୍ ନଥାଏ, ଫ୍ରାଟର୍ନିଟି ଥାଏ, ସବୁ କଥା ଆପଣଙ୍କୁ ବୁଝେଇ ଦେଇଗଲେ। ତେଣୁ ସେ ବିଷୟରେ କିଛି କହିବା ଦରକାର ନାହିଁ। କିନ୍ତୁ ସେ ଆଣିଲେ କାହିଁକି ଗୋପୀନାଥ ମହାନ୍ତିଙ୍କି ଏଥିରେ ସମ୍ପୃକ୍ତ କରାଇଲେ, ଯେହେତୁ ମୋ ଦୃଷ୍ଟିରେ ଗୋପୀନାଥ ମହାନ୍ତି ହେଉଛନ୍ତି ଆଦିବାସୀ ଜନଜୀବନର ଜଣେ ଲିପିକାର, ଏ କ୍ରନିକ୍ଲର ଅଫ୍ ଆଦିବାସୀ ଲାଇଫ୍। ସେଇଟା ହେଉଛି ସବୁଠୁ ବଡ଼ କଥା ଗୋପୀନାଥ ମହାନ୍ତିଙ୍କର। ତେଣୁ ଗୋପୀନାଥ ମହାନ୍ତି ଯେଉଁ ଉପନ୍ୟାସ ଗୁଡ଼ିକରେ କ'ଣ କରିଛନ୍ତି ନା, ଆଦିବାସୀ ଜୀବନକୁ ଦେଖିଛନ୍ତି, ଆଦିବାସୀ ଜୀବନକୁ ପାଖରୁ ଦେଖିଛନ୍ତି ଏବଂ ଲେଖିଛନ୍ତି ତାଙ୍କ ବିଷୟରେ, ତାଙ୍କ ଚରିତ୍ର ମାଧ୍ୟମରେ, ଏବଂ ଆଦିବାସୀ ଜୀବନର ଦୁଃଖ ସୁଖ, ତାର ଟ୍ରାଜେଡ଼ି, ତାର ସ୍ୱପ୍ନ ଏବଂ ସ୍ୱପ୍ନଭଙ୍ଗ ସବୁକୁ ଲେଖିଛନ୍ତି। ଏଇଥିପାଇଁ ଯେ ଆଦିବାସୀ ଜୀବନ କେମିତି ଔପନିବେଶିକ ଶାସନ କାଳରେ ବିପର୍ଯ୍ୟସ୍ତ ହୋଇଗଲା ତାର, ଏବଂ ଆଧୁନିକତା ନାମରେ ଆମେ କେମିତି ଆଦିବାସୀ ଜୀବନ ଭିତରକୁ, ଜୀବନଚର୍ଯ୍ୟା ଭିତରକୁ ତାକୁ ବିନିଷ୍ଟ କଲୁ। पृथ्वी सारा तो आदिवासी मान अन्य लिखिं से चिन्नुआ जानते आप आफ्रिकार जो सब बड़ लेखक उपन्यासिक चिन्नुआ अच्छी भी थिंग्स फॉल अपार्ट को कंपेयर करा जाए गोपीनाथ महांती सहित से भी सही कथा लिखिं जे केमिति बाहर प्रभाव रे तांकर जो कस्टम थिला तांकर संगीत थिला तांकर कला तांकर संस्कृति सब गुड़ा को आस्ते आस्ते धीरे धीरे भांगी जाए कारण यूरोपीय माने भाबुतिले जे से माने जे आदिवासी माने नुहंती से मानकर तांको सिविलाइज करबा दरकार तांको 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 आउ आधुनिक करबा दरकार से मोर गोटे छोट कथा मन पड़ी जो रेभेन्सा साहेब रेभेन्सा कॉलेज कटक कॉलेज तैयारी करिया बसिले से गोटे चिट्ठी देले गवर्नर जनरल पाखक से कहले कौन जदि कटक कॉलेज तैयारी हम कटक कॉलेज विल सिविलाइज ओडिशा आज प्रेसिडेंसी एंड पाटना कॉलेज सिविलाइजिंग बेंगल एंड बिहार ता माने आमे विशेष सभ्यता भितर को जाई नथिलु एवं पाश्चात्य शिक्षा इंग्रजी शिक्षा हमको सिविलाइज करूची आर वी लुकिंग एट द आदिवासीज इन द सेम वे मोर प्रथम प्रश्न आमे आदिवासी मानन को सही कॉलोनियल दृष्टि रे देखु चुकी द वे द ब्रिटिशर्स लुक्ड एट अस आर यू लुकिंग एट द आदिवासीज दैट इज माय क्वेश्चन तेणु आप भावन्तु तांको सभ्यता महान तांकर निजर व्यक्ति जो कथा सब कथा जेन ड्रेज कहीगले सबू कथार तांकर गोटे निजस्वपण अच्छी तांकर निजर संस्कृति अच्छी तेणु आम मेन स्ट्रीम ना रे तांको नष्ट करवा ना तांको आम शिक्षित शिक्षक करवा तांको लैंग्वेज तांकर भाषा तांकर संस्कृति को जेते दूर जाए संभव ताकू साइतिकी रखिबा बोधे गोपीनाथ महांती सबू उपन्यास से एत बड़ जे से संस्कृति से कला ता संपर्क में कहते ये रखा खाली आपण नुहति से भी बहुत समय ब्रिटिश थिला बेले 1835 आरंभ कर विभिन्न समय विद्रोह करछंदी एबे भी नारायणपाटना रे एबे भी काशीपुर रे एबे भी जाजपुर रोड रे से माने तांगे तळ विस्थापित होउछंती जेतळे तांको बाहर कर दिया जाउची तांको जंगल जमीर अधिकार वंचित करा जाउची से माने भी पार्टी करूछंती एवं आमर कर्तव्य होउची जदि तांकर न्याज्य दाबी न पूरण न होउची बा गोटे समता न आसुची सहरीकरण बा शिल्पीकरण एवं तांको ये भितरे सेटा हमको देखा पड़ो जमीती तांकर एपरिक आप देखुना मत बड़ा आश्चर्य लगे आदि बहुत जगह बर्तमान आउ आदिवासी बोली लेखा होनी जनजाति लेखा जाउची तार कारण कौन तार कारण गोटे समय आदिवासी जो आम कहले आदिवासी आम कहले जे माने प्रिमिटिव बोली कहले ओडिशार तो 17टा आउरी प्रिमिटिव कम्युनिटी रही आम जनजाति कहीं कहवा कारण आम अनकनसीयस भावुंट अवचेतन काले मूल अधिवासी आम कहीदे कि तेणु आदिवासी शब्द ही ठीक जनजाति अपेक्षा मो दृष्टि रे मो भाषाविद नुहे तेणु मुझे नहीं तो जो कथा सब कहीगले जेन ड्रेज बहुत गुरुत्वपूर्ण कथा तेणु आम बहुत शिखिले तेणु जॉन ड्रेज दुई पट शब्द कहि कारण तांको कृतज्ञता न जनइले आजिर सभा संपूर्ण हम नहीं सर we are indeed delighted and honored to have a distinguished economist, social scientist and activist who is working on several developmental issues including the tribal issues in present day India. His lecture has extremely enriched and deepened our understanding of the ways in which the life of the Adivasis can help us build a better future for humanity. From Professor Dreyes' own simple and extraordinary life, we can derive inspiring and useful lessons in compassion and commitment to public cause. Looking at his life, one really feels that as if he is reading a unforgettable chapter of Gopinath Mohanty's novel. I again thank you, sir, for being with us today and sharing with us some your deep insights into the tribal world and its challenges that India faces today. Thank you, sir, again. मु आपण माननकु पुणी आउ थरे आम आयोजित ये आसीथिबारु समय देई आसीथिबारु एवं मंचासीन अतिथि माने आमको आसिक अनुग्रहित करिथिबारु साहित्य एकाडेमी तरफरु एवं गोपीनाथ महांती ट्रस्ट तरफरु मु आपण समस्त की पुणी थरे कृतज्ञता ज्ञापन करूची धन्यवाद।
आज एठारे सभा भंग हला सभापति घोषणा कले।